I came home from an 18-month deployment to find my house sold, my wife remarried, and my death certificate already filed. I was never dead. Think about what that sentence means. You're deployed. You're serving your country. You're in a combat zone or near one. You're stressed, exhausted, doing your duty. You're counting down days to get home to your wife, to the life you've built together. And while you're gone, your wife is dismantling that life. She's selling the house, your house. The one you bought together, the one you made the down payment on with your military signing bonus. She's remarrying. Not divorcing you, first remarrying, while still legally married to you. She's filed a death certificate in your name, falsifying federal documents, creating a legal record that says you're dead. And all of this happened while you were overseas, unable to contact anyone, unable to verify anything, unable to stop it. This is not a story about infidelity. This is not a story about betrayal. This is a story about a man whose entire identity was erased by someone who was supposed to love him. And when he comes home and discovers it, his nightmare doesn't end. It gets worse. This is one of the most devastating stories I've ever read. Okay, before I read this full story, let me give you context. This is from R, Military Stories and R, Legal Advice, and it got picked up by military support communities and legal forums because the situation is genuinely unprecedented in scope. This story covers an 18-month military deployment, a wife who took advantage of that absence, fraudulent documents, a fake death certificate, a house sold without consent, identity theft on a federal level, a remarriage while still legally married, coming home to literal legal non-existence, a legal and identity nightmare that takes months to untangle, a conspiracy that involved multiple people, military support systems being activated to help restore his life. The hardest part of the story isn't the emotional betrayal, though that's devastating. It's understanding the sheer logistics of what she pulled off. It required forged documents, fraudulent death certificate, legal cooperation or circumvention from title company, conspiracy with others, careful timing. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a calculated dismantling of another human being's identity and life. Let's get into it. I'm 34 years old. I'm a major in the United States Army. I've been in the military for 12 years. Before this deployment, I was stationed at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. My wife, Sarah, is 31. We met at college, got married right after graduation, bought a house together about 5 years ago. Married life was normal. We argued sometimes. We had financial disagreements, but nothing was severely broken. Or at least that's what I believed. In January, I deployed. It was an 80-month deployment to the Middle East. Not a combat zone specifically, but close enough technical and advisory role. I couldn't leave base easily. Communication was limited. I could make phone calls occasionally. I could send emails through military channels, but I wasn't exactly accessible. Sarah stayed behind. My plan was for her to keep the house, work her job in HR, and wait for me to come back. We talked about maybe starting a family when I got back. Normal deployment stuff. For the first few months, things seemed fine. Sarah would call me when she could. We'd video chat maybe once a month. She'd tell me about her job, about the house, about our dog. Nothing seemed wrong. But then around month 4, something shifted. Her calls became less frequent. Our video chats stopped happening. When I'd call her, she'd say she was busy or tired, or the connection was bad. She'd keep conversations short. I was deployed. I had limited ability to verify anything. I had to trust that things were fine at home. This is important. Military deployment creates a specific vulnerability. You have to trust that your family is holding down the fort. You have to believe that your spouse isn't going to dismantle your entire life while you're defending your country. I think that's part of what made this so effective. By month 6, my emails to her were going answered slower and slower. When she did respond, they were increasingly vague. I'd write, "How was your week?" She'd respond, "Busy, talk soon." By month 8, she stopped taking my calls. She'd text back saying she was working late, or she had plans, or she was tired. I was confused. I was hurt. I was also stuck halfway through a deployment, unable to really do anything about it. I tried to contact her more, but it just felt like I was bothering her. Then around month 9, something strange happened. I got a letter from our mortgage company. It had been forwarded through military mail. The letter said our house was being removed from the active mortgage rolls. It said the deed had been transferred and the outstanding mortgage balance had been paid off in full. I was confused. We still owed about $120,000 on that house. We didn't have that kind of cash just sitting around. I tried to call the mortgage company, but they wouldn't give me information without being able to verify certain Security questions. I couldn't answer some of the questions because Sarah was the one who handled most of the paperwork. So I tried calling Sarah, she didn't answer. I sent emails, no response. I asked my command to help me. I explained the situation. My CO looked into it and got back to me 3 days later. And he looked uncomfortable. He said, Major, I'm going to be straight with you. The mortgage company confirmed that your house deed has been transferred and the mortgage has been settled, but they won't say who it was transferred to or who paid the mortgage without Sarah's authorization. That's when I knew something was genuinely wrong. At this point, if you were deployed and getting these signals, what would you do? Would you try to get emergency leave? Would you try to contact military legal services? I spent the last 3 months of my deployment absolutely stressed. I tried everything to get information. I called military legal services. They told me that without being present to verify documents, there wasn't much they could do remotely. I reached out to my mother who lives nearby the house. I asked her to drive by and check on things. She called me back and I could hear the shock in her voice. She said the house had a for sale sold sign on it. And it wasn't just sold, it was completely empty. No furniture, no vehicles in the driveway. My heart just stopped. I was 18 months from home and my entire life appeared to have evaporated. When I finally got home, and I'm not going into all the details of the emotional state, I went straight to the house, or tried to. There was a new family living there. They'd purchased it 8 months prior. I went to my mother's house instead. She was waiting for me. She told me what she'd been able to piece together. Sarah had apparently hired a lawyer about 7 months into my deployment. That lawyer had helped her file a mortgage payoff using some kind of fraud. My mother wasn't entirely clear on the mechanism, but it involved forged documents and money from somewhere. Sarah had sold the house to a buyer about 2 months later, but here's where it gets worse. My mother said, honey, there's something else, Sarah. She got remarried. I thought I'd misheard. I said, what? Mom said she married another man about 4 months ago. It was in the local paper. She changed her last name back to her maiden name first, then took his name. Was standing in my mother's living room, having just landed from deployment, and I was finding out my wife had remarried. I asked, how is that possible? We're still legally married. My mother didn't have an answer. That's when I decided to do something my military training suggested. I needed to take inventory of the situation. I needed to know exactly what had been done. So I started calling. I called the house's title company. I called our bank. I called the mortgage company. I requested records. And what I found was worse than the house being sold. Guess what I found? Just guess. Because the house being sold and her remarrying. That's not even the worst part. When I finally got access to all the records, and this required hiring a lawyer and going through proper channels, since I was technically the property owner, here's what I found. Sarah had sold the house for $385,000. The new owners had been told the house was paid off and didn't need an appraisal. That part was forged. The mortgage payoff letter? Forged. It used my signature from a previous document digitally reproduced on a new document. The mortgage company said they later discovered it was fraud. But by that point, the deed had already been transferred. The money from the house sale? $385,000 went into an account, not in my name, not in our joint account. A new account opened in Sarah's name only, and then it was systematically withdrawn. Her lawyer had helped her change her name back to her maiden name legally. Then she married a man named Richard Holbrook. The marriage certificate was filed, and everything was legal on that. And because technically, from a state records perspective, she was no longer Sarah. She was Sarah back to her maiden name, and then to her new married name. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. Sarah's lawyer had filed a death certificate. A death certificate in my name, dated about 6 months into my deployment. It said I died of natural causes in a hospital in Germany. It was fraudulent on every level. I was never hospitalized. I was never in Germany. I was never dead. But that death certificate was filed in the state where we lived. When I found out about the death certificate, I literally couldn't breathe. I was dead. Legally, on paper, I was dead. My social security number had been flagged as a deceased person's number. My military records, it was complicated because military records don't just disappear, but civilian records? I was a ghost. The death certificate was filed right after the house was sold. I think it was insurance. Life insurance. She'd taken out a life insurance policy on me, probably right after we got married. Which isn't unusual, but the policy amount was $250,000. She was trying to collect on it. Do you see what this was? This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just taking money. This was a calculated multi-step conspiracy to sell the house without my consent fraud, pocket the money theft. Declare me dead, federal fraud. Collect life insurance, insurance fraud. Remarry and start a new life with the proceeds. This was premeditated. This was planned. This was executed while I was serving my country. I called my lawyer. My new lawyer, because I'd had to hire one. I said, what do I do? I'm apparently dead. He said, we have to go to the FBI. This involves multiple federal crimes. Fraud, identity theft, filing false federal documents. This is beyond small claims court. This is criminal. The FBI got involved. That part was surreal, having federal agents contact me to basically say, yes, you've been the victim of massive federal fraud. The investigation revealed even more layers to what Sarah had done. She hadn't acted alone. Her lawyer, a man named Gerald Mitchell, had actively participated in the fraud. He'd forged documents. He'd filed false records. He'd coordinated with Sarah to make it all seem legitimate. Sarah's new husband, Richard Holbrook, appeared to have known about at least some of this. The money trails showed that some of the proceeds from the house sale had gone directly to him. Whether he knew the full extent of the fraud or just benefited from a new relationship with what he thought was a wealthy woman, the FBI was investigating. The life insurance company, when contacted, said they'd actually caught the fraud before paying. A death certificate filed 6 months into an active military deployment raised red flags. They'd contacted the Department of Defense to verify and found out I was very much alive and deployed. So they'd flagged the claim and never paid it. That actually saved me from one layer of this nightmare. But the other stuff, the house, the money, the false documents that had already been executed, the house was in the hands of innocent buyers who didn't know. It had been sold fraudulently. Recovering that property was going to be complicated and potentially impossible. The FBI subpoenaed records. They interviewed Sarah. They brought in the mortgage company's fraud investigators. They dug into every transaction. What they found was that Sarah had planned this meticulously. She'd researched how to file a death certificate. She'd researched how to transfer property. She'd worked with her lawyer to forge documents. She'd hidden money. The timeline suggested she'd started planning this maybe a month or two into my deployment. She'd started executing about 4 months in. At what point do you think she decided to do this? Was there a moment where she thought, this is my chance? Or was this planned before I even left for deployment? I had a choice. I could pursue criminal charges against my wife, or I could try to work something out civilly. My lawyer strongly advised me to pursue criminal charges. Because of the severity of the fraud, I chose to. Sarah was arrested about a week after the FBI wrapped their preliminary investigation. She was charged with wire fraud, identity fraud, filing false federal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft. Her lawyer, Gerald Mitchell, was charged with aiding and abetting fraud, conspiracy, filing false documents. Richard Holbrook was initially investigated but not charged, though the money he'd benefited from was flagged as proceeds of fraud. The legal process was long. Sarah went to trial about 14 months after I got home. Her defense was that she needed money and made poor decisions, but she claimed she never intended to keep me from accessing my own accounts. She just needed liquid capital. That argument didn't hold up because the death certificate was premeditated. You don't accidentally file a death certificate. You don't accidentally forge documents. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was planned malice. She was convicted on 4 of the 5 counts. She's currently serving a 5-year federal sentence in a minimum security facility. The house situation was more complicated. The new owners had purchased in good faith. They'd hired inspectors. They'd trusted the title company. There was a legal principle at play called innocent purchaser in good faith, which meant I couldn't just take the house back from them. However, I was able to sue Sarah's estate, which was relatively empty, because most of the money had been spent or hidden to recover the equity I'd lost. I ended up recovering about $40,000, which was roughly my down payment on some of the equity gains. It wasn't close to fair, but it was something. My military career also took a hit. Not from command, they were supportive, but from the sheer emotional and legal aftermath. I had to take leave to deal with all of this. I eventually decided not to re-enlist. After 14 years, I left the military. It wasn't the deployment that broke me. It was coming home to find that the person I'd trusted with my life had systematically dismantled my existence. The thing that's hardest to explain is what it does to you psychologically to be declared dead by someone you loved. I had to go through the process of undeclaring my death. I had to have a lawyer petition the court to have the death certificate nullified. I had to provide evidence that I was alive. I had to go to Social Security and explain that, yes, I'm the person who was declared dead, and no, I'm not dead. It took months to fully cleanse my records. Every agency had a different process. The military was actually the easiest. They have protocols for this stuff. The civilian side, it was a bureaucratic nightmare. I couldn't get credit for almost a year. My credit was destroyed because I was dead. I couldn't get a car loan. I had to use a debit card for everything because credit applications would come back denied because the deceased major name had applied. I had therapy. I had a lot of therapy. My therapist said something to me once that stuck. What Sarah did was worse than infidelity. Infidelity is betrayal. What she did was erasure. She didn't just betray you, she tried to erase you from existence. I started dating about 2 years after all this. That's hard. You have trust issues that go beyond normal post-divorce stuff. How do you trust again after someone tried to make you legally non-existent? I eventually met someone new. She knew about all of this going in. She understood that the trust damage was severe. We're getting married next year. We bought a house together, and I'll admit I have the title in my name only. I know that's not ideal, but I'm still working through it. If this happened to you, how long do you think it would take to trust again? Months? Years? Ever? People ask me if I forgive Sarah. The answer is complicated. I don't forgive what she did. I think she committed serious crimes and deserved to be punished. She's being punished. But do I think she was evil? I don't know. Maybe she was. Maybe she was just someone who felt trapped in a marriage and made catastrophically bad decisions. I'll never really know. What I do know is that my experience changed my view of trust fundamentally. I've learned that even people you trust completely can betray you in unimaginable ways. I've also learned that you can recover from that. It's not easy. It takes time. It takes therapy. It takes new relationships where you have to be vulnerable again despite the risk. I'm doing okay. Some days are harder than others, but I'm alive. I'm rebuilding. I'm not going to let what she did define the rest of my life. I've actually become an advocate for military spouse fraud awareness. I work with military legal services now to educate other service members about the vulnerabilities they face while deployed. I tell my story, not for revenge, but to help people understand that this can happen. And here's what to do if it does. Sarah gets out in 3 years. I don't know what she'll do. That's not my concern anymore. She made her choices, so that's the story. And I need to say, this is one of the darkest stories I've ever read. This isn't just about infidelity or betrayal. This is about someone weaponizing the legal system, weaponizing the entire federal infrastructure to erase another human being. And the scariest part? It almost worked. If the life insurance company hadn't flagged the claim, she might have gotten away with a significant portion of this. I want to ask you, what was the moment in this story that shocked you the most? Was it the death certificate? The remarriage? The amount of premeditation required? And here's a harder question. Do you think trust can ever be fully rebuilt after something like this? Or does an experience like this change you permanently? Drop a comment and tell me. I want to hear what you think. And if you're military or a military spouse, or if you know someone who is, please share this. Be aware of your vulnerabilities. Protect your documents. Set up alerts on your financial accounts. Make sure someone you trust can verify your status while you're deployed. This man's story is extreme, but the vulnerabilities are real for anyone in military service. Thanks for watching. If this story shocked you like it did me, please hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.